By the time dawn breaks on Thursday, August 1, 2024, it will be easy to confirm if scrolls of history will be filled with what could turn out to be a huge anti-government protest or the combined efforts of government, security agencies, clerics, traditional rulers, and party chieftains could succeed in their collective desire to ward it off. Whichever way the pendulum swings, it will not obliterate the fact that Nigeria has had a long history of protests or civil demonstrations. Let's recall a few of them. November 1929 Aba Women Revolt. Even though it was recorded historically as Aba Women's Riots, it was a massive protest across the southeastern area during colonial rule in Nigeria. Thousands of women, particularly in the defunct Owerri and Calabar provinces, organized a massive revolt against unpopular and repressive policies imposed by the British colonial administration, touching off one of the most frontal attacks on colonial rule. Especially, the women were averse to the imposition of taxes which they considered unjust and unfair. Beyond taunting the Nigerian aides of the colonial officers, the women attacked European stores, Barclays Bank, and native courts run by the colonial officials. Many prisoners regained freedom when they attacked the prisons. In response, the colonial police and troops were called in. They fired into the crowd in Owerri and Calabar, killing more than 50 women and wounding over 50 others. It took 2 months, November and December 1929, for the colonial government to suppress them. They, however, succeeded in compelling the colonial authority to abolish the taxes and other unfavorable policies. The protest had gone down in history as a famous feminist and anti-colonial revolt. Egba Women Revolt. This is another feminist revolt which began in November 1948. It was a series of non-violent protests spearheaded by the mother of music icon Fela Anikulapo Kuti, late Mrs. Fumilayo Ransom Kuti. The women's grouse was the unbearable burden of taxation on women in Abeokuta, capital of modern-day Ogun State and its environs. The women, numbering over 200,000, led by well-educated and well-traveled Mrs. Ransom Kuti, demanded the abrogation of taxes on women and the inclusion of women in running the affairs of Abeokuta Native Authority, the precursor to modern-day local government councils. But their appeals fell on deaf ears. They therefore intensified their protest until the abdication of the tyrannical king, Oba Ladipo Ademola, the then Alake of Egba. One major gain of the women after the revolt was the transformation of the Abeokuta Women Union to Nigerian Women Union, transcending ethnic bases with branches in major cities across Nigeria. 1948 Enugu coal miners strike. As a result of huge coal deposit, Enugu is known as a coal city. In 1949, exactly 75 years ago, coal miners in Enugu, capital of defunct Eastern Region and modern-day Enugu State, embarked on strike to demand better working conditions and higher wages. Specifically, the miners demanded for upgrading of hewers to artisans and the payment of housing, health, and travel allowances. It was a peaceful protest, but it escalated when the colonial police callously brutalized, maimed, and massacred 21 workers of Enugu coal mines and 51 others injured for demanding for better conditions of service in the workplace. The massacre took place on November 18, 1949 at Iva Valley. The 50 armed riot colonial police officers was led by a senior superintendent of police, F.S. Phillips. 1949 nationwide strike. In the early 1940s, the workers' welfare for people working with colonial government in Nigeria was a source of worry. The working conditions were poor and inhuman. This led to a series of protests. On May 30, 1945, prominent labor leader Michael Imodo regained his freedom after 2 years incarceration by the colonial government. He assumed his position as labor leader number 1. He mobilized the workers for a general strike which began on June 22, 1945. The strike enjoyed the support of notable nationalists and crusaders for independence, including Herbert Macaulay, Nnamdi Azikiwe, Obafemi Awolowo, among others. The strike achieved 2 goals. First, workers' wages were increased. It also heightened the crusade against colonial rule. 1964 General Strike. It lasted for 12 days, June 1 to June 12, 1964. It was a major protest in the post-independence era. The different and competing labor groups welded together in the name of Joint Action Committee, JAC, to organize a general strike. It was to demand for improved conditions of service and wage increase. The demand came on the heels of a rise in the salaries allowances of parliamentarians and ministers. Government yielded to the demands of the workers. 1978 Ali Must Go protest. In 1978, Nigerian students embarked on a nationwide protest against increase in school fees and reduction in grants by the then military regime of General Olusegun Obasanjo. The protest, which erupted in all major institutions across the country against what was termed planned commercialization of education, was like a carnival of song. Ali must go. Senator Ahmadu Ali, then a colonel in the army, was the Federal Commissioner for Education. What started as a peaceful protest later degenerated into violence when security operatives and the students clashed. This development led to deaths and the closure of a higher institution across the country. Nigerian General Strike 1981. It was the shortest general strike in Nigerian history. It lasted for only 2 days. It began on Monday, May 11, 1981. The Nigerian Labour Congress, NLC, under Comrade Hassan Sumono, organized a strike, the third in the country to demand for wage increase. By the second day, the late President Shehu Shagari yielded to the demands of the workers. A new minimum wage of 100 naira was approved. June 12, 1993 protest. The protests were politically motivated. On June 12, 1993, a free and fair presidential election was held in Nigeria, but the outcome was annulled by the then military rulers. In controversial circumstances, the annulment was trailed by protests spearheaded by several coalitions of civil society groups such as Campaign for Democracy, CD, Democratic Alternative, DA, Joint Action Committee of Nigeria, JACON, etc. Occupy Nigeria Movement protest. Occupy Nigeria movement came into being following the removal of fuel subsidy. It sponsored a series of nationwide protests and strikes. The protests and strikes began on January 2, 2012 and lasted for over a week. All major cities and towns across Nigeria were brought to a standstill. In the end, President Goodluck Ebele Jonathan reversed the policy. End SARS Protest 2020. It began as a social media campaign against the Police Special Anti-Robbery Squad, SARS. The unit was accused of extrajudicial killings, torture and extortion. The unit was dissolved, but several people were killed, others were injured. Treasured public